Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and we are back at it again with day 51 of the news and the past 24 hours of the war. First off, the title of tonight's video is incredibly interesting, and it's something we will delve into first thing on this stream. But before I go over the schedule for tonight's news, I'm actually going to hand this over to Matthew real quick so that way he can say a few words. So without further ado, take it away, Matthew.
So everybody can take a good stab at what I'm about to talk about, and I'm going to make it real quick tonight. We are quickly approaching our 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time cutoff for the merch, the Leaf Spring merch. So if you're looking to support the channel, as always, go over there and take a look at it. It's enforcerstore.com. And with that being said, we're going to jump right back to the Enforcer.
All right, thank you very much, Matthew, for saying that. First off, we're going to cover the schedule for tonight. We're going to cover the most pressing news, at least in the high drama on the high seas that we've seen today here in the Black Sea, and it's still 3 days after the ship was hit, still pertains to the Moskva. So we'll actually be going over that here first. But once we get out over that news, we're then going to move into the Kyiv area, where we've had a small amount of news today. And then we're going to cover the news in Kursk and also on the northern border. And then we'll also include the location unknowns all in one category. So everything up here is in its own little group. We will then start moving on down towards the Kharkiv and Belgorod area. And before we get to it, we're going to answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat in between. We're then going to move on down into the rest of the country. We'll cover all the Donbas, but before we get to Mariupol, we will then pause again to take another 3 to 5 questions from the chat. We will then cover the news in Mariupol, the rest of the news in the southern front, and then we're going to cover the international news that we've gotten, because we have about 4 bits of news from all around the world. So with that, let's get right into the news. First off, it sounds like there may be something a little bit more interesting that has happened with the Moskva, and we don't really know if it's actually true or not, but there's been a lot of speculation that the Moskva actually probably was carrying nuclear weapons when it sank. The Moskva is a nuclear-capable ship that can launch nuclear missiles. I believe they're around a 350 kiloton yield, so actually a pretty sizable nuclear weapon. Well, multiple nuclear weapons that it could have had on board, and we assume that they went down with the ship. So if they did, I feel like the Russians are going to do a lot in terms of manpower and effort to try and recover those, or the Ukraine, that's really getting way out there. That's kind of getting into conspiracy theory land. I was going to say maybe the Ukrainians would try and pull some super amazing operation to try and locate the wreck and then retrieve the nuclear weapons for themselves if they're on it. But but the Ukrainians don't even really have a navy, so that's really out of the picture. Nonetheless, the link here is on the marker, so that way you can go read where I got this information. And before we move on from that, the Day 51 map should be working today, so make sure it is. I tried to look at it, and it looked like it was working then when I put it up, so make sure it's still working, because yesterday we had some glitches with it, and apparently it didn't show the Day 50 map, it showed the Day 49 map. So I thank everyone for bringing that to my attention, and so now we're going to move on to the Kyiv area, where we have a very sad video today. A volunteer who's been helping to exhume the bodies out of the mass graves and all the bodies that have been slaughtered in the Bucha Hostomel European area appears to have had a breakdown, and someone took a picture of this poor boy. He's just tired of seeing all the suffering in the area. As you can see, there's, it looks like trash bags in a way, but I think they may be body bags that are filled with all of the dead bodies of the people that he's probably helped to exhume and try and move to proper burial locations, and I hate that. I feel sorry for that kid. Sadly, I can't even understand or be in his shoes, because I don't even know what a situation like that would be like, which makes that so much worse. And so I feel sorry for the boy, but his service to Ukraine and helping to get those bodies into a proper burial location and get them out of such a humiliating grave that the Russians had to put them in is an honorable service, to say the least. So with that, we're now going to move on into the Kyiv area inside the city today, where we've seen a lot of people lining up for those Russian warship stamps. As you know, the stamp has become pretty popular. It has a pretty neat art theme, and you can see here that outside of the Kyiv post office, people are literally in a queue to get a hold of these stamps. I have to say they're actually very cool, and I love how they integrated the Ukrainian flag into the design. And you can also see the Moskva on that stamp, which is the most funny thing about this, is that that ship is now at the bottom of the sea. So gotta say, incredibly funny in a way, and it's also really neat. And it's good to know that a lot of Ukrainians support this war so much that they want to get a hold of anything that's pro-Ukrainian in this war. And I wish I could get a hold of these stamps as well, because they look incredibly cool. And I bet a lot of y'all can agree with me that that's a pretty cool design. Anyways, we're now going to move on from the Kyiv area, and we're going to move on out towards Kursk, where today we finally gotten proof here on this channel in terms of picture evidence that there are sabotage operations occurring inside of Russia from a Belarusian kind of like partisan group. The group is called the Storks Fly, and they've apparently been sabotaging railway operations all around Russia. You can see here that it appears that they've broken into a panel box, and it looks like they're in the process of sabotaging it. It looks like from here, at least on this post, it says that they've sabotaged operations in Kursk, Smolensk, and Bryansk. Let's go to the map and see where Smolensk is. I'm pretty sure I have a good idea of where it is. I'm not... Okay, there's Smolensk, and then Bryansk is probably somewhere in between. Yep, right here. Smolensk, Bryansk, and Kursk. So I think what they're trying to do is sabotage most of the railway operations, according to this post, that were heading northwards back into Belarus. So once again, wonderful to see that there is help on the outside, and that there are Belarusians who have taken it upon themselves to try and stop this war as best they can on their end, or at least slow it down for the large part. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news on the border, where we've seen Ukrainian border guards ask the Russians for papers to make sure that they're safe to cross, and apparently the Russians denied them to show them their papers, and so the Ukrainians did what any logical person would do against enemy military that got on their borders again, and they destroyed some kind of Russian BTR. So here's the video of that, and we're going to rewind it so that way y'all can see it from the start.
Отак прикордонники працюють, танк, орків,
You know something? Okay, I know this isn't a qualitative military analysis or anything, but look at this guy and how he's walking. It's like he just got done smacking someone. Honestly, this kind of like gaunt the guy's got is the same gaunt that Will Smith had when he slapped Chris Rock on the face. Like, look at this guy. It's like he just got done chopping wood or something. You know, like it's like he did nothing, but he just took out a BTR with an ATGM. So.
Наша робота, гореть, гореть!
But it looks like the Ukrainian border guards have been knocking out some pretty good work. Looks like they've been doing their part as well. And we know that the border guards valiantly stood on the border during the Russian invasion. Not really that they had a choice, that was their job to be on the border, but nonetheless, we do know that they put up some kind of small resistance at the beginning of the war on the first day, as the Russian troops began to pour over the border in the middle of the night, pretty much. So with that, we're now going to move on to the location unknowns today. We have a very small amount of them. We only have 10, which is incredibly good to me, because we still have the same volume of news that we usually have, but we've gotten about 8 new pieces of news today that didn't get marked as location unknowns, and they're actually spread out around the country and the world. So with that, we're now going to move into the location unknown news, where we can see, first off, the Ukrainians are firing artillery, and they're saying the phrase before they fire it, Russian warship, go F yourself. So check this out. But before we get it going all the way, I'm going to make sure to unmute it and start it at the very beginning. And here's the video. That's pretty cool. Hang on. Are these... Wait a minute. Let me check. Let me see here. Hang on, everyone. Stand by. I just want to check this real quick before I say anything. Okay. And that looks like some kind of CGI image, but still, you can kind of cross-reference it a little bit. Maybe check the first one as well. Oh, man, I can't tell, and I'm not going to say anything definitively, but they do, and I'm just saying this because of this little, I don't really know what purpose that little, bayonet-looking thing on the muzzle brake serves on artillery pieces, sadly. I'm not an expert on everything artillery, but that does look a lot like an M777. But the thing is that this is so much smaller than an M777, so I'm thinking that it's not. It's probably some sort of 105mm gun, but nonetheless, listen to the sound they make, and also listen to those Ukrainians. Man, I gotta tell you, the sound of that artillery in that video was impressive, and also it was really cool to see the Ukrainians having a good time shooting the artillery at the Russians. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a destroyed Russian convoy. Once again, the Ukrainians are not letting up on them. I don't know where this convoy was, sadly, but they wiped this thing out to the ground. It looks like all of the vehicles in this video were mangled beyond recognition nearly. So without further ado, here's the video.
Писать, что это якобы украинская колонна, ну, можем посмотреть. Рус. И вот все, что случилось с российской колонной, которая пришла в Украину. Вот 31, 33, 87 Рус. Всякие эти грузовики, БТРы, там все прочее. Чего только тут нет. Сейчас еще танки.
I mean, let's go back and look at that again. These vehicles were hit, I believe, probably not even by an AT weapon. It looks like they were hit by some kind of large bombs from a drone. This may have been a drone strike, because vehicles being destroyed to this extent has been rare. I mean, like, look at that one. That was literally turned into shreds. And so, you know, once again, this is all assumptions. It may have just been an AT unit that took out this entire convoy in this town, or an artillery strike. But still, the amount of damage committed to these vehicles is extreme and incredibly rare to see this level of damage. But nonetheless, it's a wonderful thing to see that the Ukrainians are still giving the Russians hell, and I'm assuming that morale must be at an all-time high right now, because, I mean, you know, the Ukrainians just sunk the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the only fleet that the Russians can field during this war, because the Istanbul Strait has been cut off to the Russians. So that's the only fleet they have in the Black Sea, and they've lost a flagship of it. So a large amount of their naval firepower has been lost in the process of that. And you know that's got to hype every single person up in Ukraine, because they just destroyed one of Russia's prides of the fleet. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can see a Russian convoy failing to cross a river. They finally set up a bridge somewhere over some kind of small river, and it looks like they weren't even able to use the bridge, because the first thing that happened is that it looks like the rear axles of this KAMAZ truck have fallen off the side, and the truck is hardly on there. So that's going to take hours to fix.
Короче, непонятно сейчас, что будет. Нам вот по этому мосту нужно будет переправиться туда.
Good lord. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, like, usually I think it's the standard practice to have someone kind of guide the truck onto the bridge in a way and tell them, you know, when they're straight on or something. But golly, I mean, like, the incompetence that we see. Because there's got to be some way that they actually guide the trucks onto the bridge. That is a very narrow pass. Or they don't. They just expect the drivers to actually know how to do their job, and this guy failed at doing it. So now he's blocked up a bridge for hours that the Russians probably needed to move supplies. And so now the situation in that small area has become even worse. So, nonetheless, once again, more Russian incompetence on film. I hope y'all all enjoy watching Russian incompetence in play, because you just can't make this stuff up. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians taking care of puppies that have been left behind, sadly. It's a sweet little video. I love to show sweet little videos like this, because it's a nice break from the doom and gloom of war. And so with that, here's the video. And it's got copyrighted music, of course. But you can see here that the soldier is feeding the little puppies, and they seem pretty scared of people. And if the Russians had rolled through your town, I think all the puppies would be scared of soldiers, because the Russians were probably eating them, like we've seen in other places. And so that's the end of that video. It was a nice little video to see the dogs getting fed by the soldier, and it's good to know that they are trying to take care of as many dogs as possible. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a farmer got a brand new SPG today. That's right, no more trucks, no more mortars, they've got an SPG. This will help them to defend the fields against the crows next year, for sure. But as you can see here, it's a Vodzivka or something like that. I'm sorry, I butchered that pronunciation for sure. But it looks like they got another one, so good job on him. Hopefully he'll be able to keep that for a while. And of course, whenever Ukrainians capture enemy vehicles, they are tax-free, so they don't have to pay any taxes on war spoils. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we've seen the Ukrainians capture some kind of communications vehicle of the Russians. So here's the video real quick. It's incredibly short. You can see that it did take some damage. Apparently one of its wheels was blown off, or something like that, or maybe it just deflated to the point that it can no longer be used. And I believe at that point, the Russians were more than apt to abandon the vehicle with just that amount of damage alone. And so it looks like this vehicle is largely intact. A brand new tire will put that in running order. So hopefully Ukrainians can use that to great effect. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we've seen Ukraine capture an air defense command vehicle from the Russians. They've been capturing a lot of command vehicles today and communications vehicles, and this is one of those particular types. As you can see, the rear tires look like they may have been deflated. This one specifically was surely deflated. And so it looks like that was enough in the Russians' minds to abandon the vehicle entirely. Now we can see them trying to pull it off. There's a little bit of wheel slip down there. But nonetheless, the Ukrainians have managed to capture another important piece of the Russians' communication systems. Very important thing to take care of. The two things that are really important in a battlefield are communications and logistics. That's really what the whole entire rearward lines of things composes of. You have to have communications among the combat troops to make sure that they operate effectively, and then you have to have logistics to ensure that they have the supplies to then carry through on their, orders, their objectives, and so on. So it looks like the Ukrainians are kind of attacking both now. They're attacking the command vehicles of the Russians, and they're also managing to attack the logistics as well, because we know they have done a load of damage to Russian logistics ever since the beginning of this war. We don't even know the condition they're in right now, but if I was to take an assumption, it looks like around a quarter of their initial logistics vehicles that they've entered the country with have been destroyed. So we're now going to move on to the next video, where we can see that some people have been getting shout-outs from the Ukrainian troops for their help and support in this war. And so without further ado, I'm going to let them get their due credit.
Thank you for our friends from USA. Thank you to Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, UkraineFriends.org, and Operation White Stork for the IFACs for our brigade. Is located on the front lines near Kherson, and the IFAC medical kits will be used not only to save the lives of our men, but also be used to help free the Kherson region and all the Ukraine.
Look, it's still got a tag on the medical pack.
Thank you for providing us with your much medical kit. Glory to Ukraine and God bless America.
That's really something weird to hear a Ukrainian say is God bless America. But nonetheless, it's really cool to see that they are getting the aid that's been promised to them and it is being delivered still, and that it will help them out. It sounds like they are somewhere in the Kherson region, considering that they're talking about the Kherson region. But nonetheless, it is a location unknown event. So now we are going to move on to the last two bits of location unknown news, and then we'll answer the first 3 to 5 questions. And so with that, we can see a picture that's kind of summed up the entire war for Russia in terms of their perspective, which is just the turret of a Russian tank that has been left to rot in a field. So here's the picture. As you can see, it's just a lone turret that's been dislocated from its tank, most likely in some kind of ammo detonation, and it flew off into a field and just landed there to rest. And that's really how the entire war has been going for Russia, is that the whole entire thing is blown apart, and now parts of it are just sitting in a field rotting away, much like the infantry that they still have in the southeastern fronts. So with that, we're now going to move on to our final bit of location unknown news, where we've gotten a pretty good summary of what 51 days of Ukraine winning feels like. So I'm going to let y'all see that video real quick, because it's just a funny video. And so here we go. This guy is busting down some moves right here. And I mean, like, what's really impressive to me is that a lot of people always complain that military dress uniforms are immovable. But if you watched a video of this guy, you would say they're full of it, because this guy had the full range of motion in this dress uniform of his. It actually kind of looks a lot like a U.S. military dress uniform, or the standard Soviet dress uniforms of times before. But still, this guy was busting it down in that uniform. You got to give that guy credit, and it does feel like that at this point. It feels like the Ukrainians are on top of the world nearly. They're destroying Russian flagships, still pushing the Russians back, and there's absolutely nothing that the Russians have been able to do to manage the situation and try and turn it back into their favor at this point. So with that, we've covered all of the location unknown news. I thought that was a really high note to end it on. Hope you all liked it. And so with that, before we move on to Kharkiv, we're going to answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat. And so, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So first up, we have a $100 donation from longtime channel supporter Naria, who says, "Keep on loving your streams, but please be clear about time zones. We are in daylight time in most states, not standard time, so safer to say Eastern time if you are not sure." And yes, you are correct. I am not good with time zones. I simply go by what Teespring tells me. So yes, you are definitely correct about that.
That's pretty true. So to restate that again, it's actually going to end at midnight at Eastern time tonight. So it's going to be 12 p.m. Eastern time when the limited edition run ends. So I thank you very much for clarifying that. I didn't catch that either. So I thank you so much once again for the support, Nari. You've been around for quite a while, and it does mean a lot and helps us run this channel. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $45 donation from Praise Adonai, a longtime channel supporter, who says, "Putin by letter today warned the U.S. for the second time to stop aid to Ukraine. I don't think we will stop the aid. What is Putin's most likely act of retaliation against the U.S. to get revenge?"
I don't really think there is a likely route of action that they can take, barring going straight into a world war, which the Russians do know, and I have to say they're incompetent and they're very stupid, as far as their government and their military is concerned. But still, they know that the West would steamroll them. Putin has been saying that for years. He says, there's no question at all. The Western world would defeat Russia outright in an open war. And so we have to rely on our nuclear deterrence to ensure that we can kind of like throw our weight around and ensure that our interests are upheld in the Western world as a whole. So I don't think there's really anything he could do, and I think those letters are full of empty threats, because he also said that within like the first week or two of the war, and we kept on sending aid and nothing happened. So I think he's just trying to scare us, and there's really nothing behind those threats. But I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in a way, at least as far as my opinion on the issue. And so with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to start covering the news from Kharkiv and the Donbas in general.
And the next one up is a $20 donation from Brooks Precision, who says, "Been here since first day and look forward to this every single day. Awesome job. And it looks like the Russians were test firing some missiles from a sub in the Sea of Japan, while both the U.S. and Japan are doing joint exercises. Let's go, you."
Well, I thank you very much for giving us the support, and I thank you very much for the info, because I don't really look beyond the scope of Ukraine for the most part. While there may be a few things that happen outside of it that pertain to the war, I don't really look at things like, naval operations occurring in the Sea of Japan, and the Russians also conducting what seems to be their own trials and tests, I guess trying to intimidate the West in a way. So I thank you so much for sharing that info with us, and I thank you once again so much for the support. We try our best to make sure that the news we deliver on this channel is as good as possible, and I do try and keep it neutral in its assessments, although I am pro-Ukrainian, and I'll say that right here. So I thank you so much for the support once again, and with that, we've reached the end of this question segment, and we're now going to move on into the news in Kharkiv and Belgorod. First off, we've seen the Ukrainians give the citizens of Belgorod a good scare today, as it appears that the Russians had to activate their air defense systems to defend the city from incoming Ukrainian fire or aircraft. So, without further ado, here's the video. And I'm just going to rewind that real quick so you can see it from the start. As you can see, one of their surface-to-air missiles has been let loose. We can already see that another one is apparently exploded here to the side. And that's the end of the video. We're not exactly sure what led to the anti-air defense systems being activated around the city, but nonetheless, it does show that the Ukrainians are expanding their operations beyond their own borders as far as their defense is concerned. And so I wonder what that was that activated the air defenses and where it was heading. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of news about Ukraine's operations that are going inwards into Russia, unless if they're very successful. And even at that, we don't get a lot of news about that either. The only time we really did was when the helicopter raid succeeded at Belgorod, and the Ukrainians still haven't taken credit for that yet, although it was pretty clear that they were the ones who orchestrated it. So we're now going to move on from Belgorod, and we're going to move towards the city of Kharkiv, where we've seen first off today, the Ukrainians have been, of course, giving it to the Russians on the outskirts of Kyiv, and have destroyed a tank in the woods. So I'm going to let y'all see that footage real quick. As you can see here, it appears that the tank is that bright colored dot right on the horizon of this field. It looks like we're looking at this through an ATGM scope, and they keep on magnifying to get a better view of the tank. And so now we can see that the tank has exploded, and it has been destroyed. So once again, another claim for the Ukrainians. Another tank gone, and it looks like another explosion is rocked out further in the tree line. Not exactly sure if that was hitting a second vehicle or not, but we do know that at least one tank was destroyed in that footage, which is once again another small Ukrainian victory that can be celebrated. You know, I'm thinking that dancing guy in that video I showed y'all, maybe we gotta start bringing him back every single time we see the Ukrainians win. But if we did that, the stream would be 10 hours long, because we see a lot of footage of the Ukrainians winning. So anyways, moving on from that, there was actually a footage about a week ago that came out from the Kharkiv area that showed the Russians using some kind of mine-launching vehicles to shoot mines into Kharkiv. So today we've seen that the Ukrainians have now begun operations to clear out these mines, and they've called in an EOD squad to find the mines and remove them from the neighborhoods.
В час ночи взрывы такие были, 4 штуки. Мы попросыпались, и потом тишина. Пришла смс, когда предупредили, что не выходить на улицу, не шастать такое. Вышел покурить.
Wait a minute, hang on. Let me go back to this guy. Let's look. We woke up. It was calm afterwards. Got a text with a warning not to go outside. Just out for smoke. He got a text saying, don't go outside, it's dangerous. And so he's like, all right, time to go outside. It's a smoke break. But still, nonetheless, you know, people got to smoke when they smoke. But nonetheless, you know, the EOD squads are out and about trying to defuse explosives. And so it is dangerous for people to go outside. And it's good to know that the emergency services in Ukraine still have contact with the common citizenry and can notify them of activities happening in their area.
Так метра 4-5 от окна лежит такая длинный цилиндр, вот, целый. Вот. А чуть дальше несколько штук, они разорванные, и какие-то штырьки красные торчат. Вот.
So it appears that she's explaining the shape of the mines, if they are the mines that are on the ground. But nonetheless, we can see that the EOD is taking them seriously and is trying to defuse these bombs, if they are bombs, as soon as possible. So they are mines. I don't know of what kind of design, but apparently the EOD has identified them as mines, and they're defusing them at the moment. You see that something happened over here on that house. So apparently what we just saw right then was one of the mines exploding in the street, and it apparently blew the glass panes off that building. So they were sitting over there trying to say, well, how do we remove it? And then the thing just blew up out of the middle of nowhere. So anyways, we're going to let the video continue.
В жодному випадку такі знахідки не чіпати. Дані боєприпаси мають термін ліквідації до 40 годин.
Very interesting. So apparently these are the first times that these mines have been seen in Kharkiv. I'm sorry, I keep on pronouncing it that way. But nonetheless, it's incredibly interesting to see that the city, kind of like public services, are still active. The police and firefighters are still working overtime, and we can even see that they still have operational EOD units, which is very good to know. With that, we're now going to move on further into the city, where we've seen today more evidence of shelling in Kharkiv. We're assuming that this may be some kind of retaliatory attack by the Russians for the loss of their flagship, because we have not heard of artillery attacks occurring in the city of Kharkiv for many days, if not weeks at this point. So here's the video of that. So we can see that this guy here, he's filming on his phone, and then you can start hearing the shells landing behind him and the people that you can see later on the film go running off, trying to get away from these spread of rockets that are landing in the city. We actually got news today that, of course, this attack wasn't landing anywhere on military targets. It landed entirely in a residential area and killed 7 people. It also wounded dozens. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of video we've gotten of more shelling damage inside of Kharkiv today from the incoming rocket attacks. As you can see here, another estimate saying 8 people killed, and this now includes a 7-month-old baby. So here's the footage of the damage that's been caused inside of the city. As you can see, once again, the Russians are committing completely unsolicited attacks on the civilian population just for the fact of committing a reprisal, which is just sickening. So with that, we've now reached the end of that video, and finally, I'm going to show y'all an incredibly interesting and very inspirational video in a way. While the damage has continued to rain down in Kharkiv, even today with the incoming artillery attacks and shellings, the Ukrainian citizens that still live in the city have not given up in ensuring that they do their duty to make sure that their city is as well off as possible. And in this video today, we've actually seen a large amount of citizens take it upon themselves to get into the streets and start clearing out the damage wherever possible. And so here's the video of that today, and I have to say, it's really something, because you can see the before and after footage of them cleaning up the area, and you can see that they're doing impressive work here. So anyways, I'm going to let y'all see the video. And as you can see, just a huge effort on the part of the civilians to clean up the city as best they can. You've got to give it to the Ukrainians. No matter what position they're in, soldier, civilian, politician, they're all doing their part as much as they can to help out wherever they can. And so, a million amounts of credit to them. And once again, I would like to go back and click on this marker once more to show y'all what that area looks like in this picture. That's what it used to look like. That's what it looks like now. And so just imagine the amount of man-hours and effort that all of these citizens have put into cleaning up their city. I've got to say, that's incredibly impressive. And the fact that they're doing this while the city is still under attack in a way is something impressive to me. And so, once again, huge credit to the Ukrainians. Their people are some of the most impressive on earth in what they're doing right now. They do unbelievable things almost everywhere, including the citizens, where you believe that things would be ordinary. So we're now going to move on from Kharkiv, and we're now going to move on down into the Donbas, where we've gotten a couple of more bits of interesting news today. First off, we've gotten a montage from Russian reporters in the Donbas. So I'm just going to show y'all that real quick and let y'all see that for yourselves. Actually, we're going to go to Twitter and watch that. Well, actually, we're going to try and watch it from here first, or we can do this. All right, well. So it says on here that it may be sensitive. I'll have to, of course, stop it if it is. But anyways, here's the video. So you can see the reporter is running around with the troops. He's now hiding in a dugout with them. We now see a T-72B moving along down the street. He's now talking about it, but unfortunately I can't show it because there's copyrighted music. We now see a tank firing. Further down the way, we can now see it firing again. And then probably again now that they've zoomed in. Yep, again. It's kind of predictable how they film the stuff and the Russian media now, they kind of like to show the same thing about 3 or 4 times in a way. But you now see the T-72B moving through the tree line. And we can now see the Russians apparently using some kind of drone. They're trying to copy the Ukrainians in a way, because we know that they weren't using a lot of drones at the outset of this war, but now they're starting to use them as well, probably in response to how effective the Ukrainians have been able to use their drones during this war. So we can see here that they're sitting around chatting it up with the reporter. Now you can see them talking. Now we can see what appears to be the same T-72B moving around. We can now see this fella. He's standing here talking to the camera. Unfortunately, we can't hear him because there's copyright music playing in the background. And we can see this guy. He's apparently talking to the camera. He's got AK-74 of a kind. Now we can see an ATGM being fired behind the reporter. Now he's going to show nothing. He's going to show the snow. Now they're loading up another ATGM to fire, which they then fire here. There you go. And of course we don't see the target they're firing it at, which is good to know. So now they're crawling around in the snow. I'm not really sure what's going on here. And with that, that's the end of the video. And so we're now going to move on from that. There's really not much to explain. It was just kind of a news reporter moving around in the Donbas area. You've kind of seen that guy, I think, before. And so we know that he's just kind of in there with the propaganda stuff, usually trying to show the Russians in the best light possible, much like it would be in their interest to do. So we're now going to move on down towards the Donetsk area of the Donbas, where today we've seen a tank get destroyed near Donetsk. So with that, here's this video. As we see there, it's some kind of Russian tank that got evaporated. And so, once again, good to see. We know that the Ukrainians have added an extra couple of marks to their Russian tanks destroyed list. And so it's good to know that they continue to impose heavy damage on the Russian armor, Russian personnel, and now the Russian fleets at sea. And so we're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten in the Donbas before we go to Mariupol, where we can see Ukrainian air defense shoot down an Orlan drone. It's an incredibly short video, but it is interesting to see because we actually haven't seen Ukrainian air defense shoot down a drone for about 2 weeks at this point. And so without further ado, here's the video. But before we play it all the way, I'm going to turn up the volume and rewind this to the start so y'all can see it.
Hello.
Да.
Hello, блядь.
So you can see that they took down the drone. Pretty neat stuff. So that's pretty neat to see. Once again, we saw another drone get shot down. Just for everyone to know, we're going to pull up the Orlan 10. I think we actually saw one of these taken. Oh, yes, we did. This was the one, remember everyone, this was the one that days ago the Ukrainians got a hold of and they found out that there was a normal, like, Nikon camera inside of it, and there was a whole bunch of jank stuff going on with it. So it's pretty funny to know that the Ukrainians shot one down with a surface-to-air missile. But nonetheless, very good to see, and it is once again good to know that the Ukrainians are doing their best to shut down the Russians wherever they are and whatever they're doing. So we're now going to move on from that towards the Mariupol area, but before we do, we're actually going to answer 3 to 5 more questions from the chat, and then we'll get to the Mariupol news and the news of the Southern Front. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So first up, we have a $20 donation from Joe Deskovics, I think is how you say it. He says, don't have a question. And with that being said, keep up the good work.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And try not to take too many shots here as we move on to the next one. The next one we have is from G. Hill, who puts in a $20 donation and says, I follow news about Ukraine war and even binge watch YouTube sometimes, but still not enough and definitely not as interesting as your live stream. Thanks y'all for everyday hard work. I'm loving it, and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini, and thank you so much for the support. We have been trying to go around and look at other streams now because, you know, we've kind of just been like interested. What are other people doing and saying about this war? And we see that not a lot of people actually get as high an audience as the stream, which was really interesting to me. And I guess the reason is just people just like it. So I thank y'all so much for hanging out and watching it. It is pretty neat. And of course, I try and deliver as much news as possible. But unfortunately, my streams can only go on for about 2 hours at most because they go on any further than that. We wear out here, and there's not really enough to cover that can go on beyond 2 hours. And usually, most of the time, questions take up about the last 40 minutes of the stream. So there's a lot of interesting information that's covered then, and I guess that kind of adds a little bit of info to the Ukraine war, at least as far as assumptions and interesting questions go. And so with that being said, I thank you so much for the support once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And before I move on, I forgot to mention earlier that this Sunday, when we do our fundraiser, we will be making our 10% donation from the profits of the merch, just if anybody was wondering. So stick around on Sunday for our fundraiser. That's when we're going to be doing it. So next up, we have a super chat from Kurt Nygren, who puts in a $20 donation. He says, "Thank you for your big heart, especially when showing the dogs victimized by this war."
And I thank you so much for the support. And yes, I have a big affection for dogs. I'm a dog person. I love dogs, and I hate to know that dogs have been put in such bad situations across all of Ukraine due to the war. People had to leave them behind initially, not because they just didn't care about the dogs, but because some countries were saying that they weren't going to allow dogs to come with the refugees, and so they had to be left behind. And then they were left to an incredibly terrible fate sometimes at the hands of the Russians, because we actually saw some evidence a while ago that they may have been eating dogs. So sadly, I hate that that's a thing that's happened to the dogs, but I do have a very big heart for dogs. And so I thank you so much for appreciating that. Of course, you know, it kind of with the context, of course, I'm going to include a lot of news about dogs here and there wherever it is. So I thank you once again. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the last question of this section, and then we're going to move on to the Mariupol news, the Eastern Front news, and then actually the news from around the rest of the world. And so with that, what is the last question?
And real quick, before I go to the last question of the segment, we have a $13 donation from Martin Nielsen. Thank you very much, sir, for your donation. We very much appreciate it. And our final question of the segment goes to Level 70, who puts in a $12 donation and says, "The Russians claim they broke through Ukrainian defenses and seized Popasna. Is there any confirmation of this?"
Popasna. Let me go look for that city real quick. Popasna. Where would that be? I'm sure it's right in front of my face, but let me go type that in real quick. Popasna, city in Ukraine. Well, that's a good starter. That's a good thing to know. Popasna. I mean, they may have. I think I have that on my map as something they already control. Yeah. I don't think they've actually broken through. I mean, like, if they have, that's a very, very small frontline movement, because I've actually marked that as a front line for quite a while, actually. I think that may have been there for weeks. So that's no news to me, because the front line has already encompassed Popasna. So if that is something they've claimed today, it's kind of expected. That's kind of like them making a huge deal about Volnovakha, but it was literally just a half mile from their starting border in the Donetsk and Luhansk areas once the initial invasion started. So I thank you so much for the support, but I don't really think that's a huge deal. And if they're calling that a breakthrough, that would be like a World War I general saying that taking the frontline trench of the Germans is a massive breakthrough and means the war will end soon. It seems a little silly considering that my front line has encompassed Popasna for weeks at this point. So I think the Russians are trying to hype up something that's really small into something big. But I thank you for the support nonetheless. It does help us run this channel. And so with that, we have reached the end of that question segment, and we're going to answer everyone's super chats before the end of the night, and also questions from the normal chat. But with that, we're now going to move on to the news from Mariupol, the Eastern Front, and also the international news that we haven't covered yet. For some reason, it feels like tonight the stream is going by really fast. I don't know if it's just me with a coffee or what. But anyways, we're now going to get to the news in Mariupol. Starting off on the western side of the city, where we can see you know who, our TikTok stars in Mariupol. So let's see that video real quick. Let's give it a second to load, and there we go. We can actually see some shots popping off around them. This is one of the rare videos where we actually see them getting shot at. Usually there's no fire going on anywhere in the background, but tonight that appears to not be the case, which is very interesting. Anyways, we're going to let the video continue. And so with that, that's the end of this video. Once again, it's incredibly impressive to see that they're actually getting shot at for once, because usually they don't, and it makes it look like a pure propaganda film. And so we've at least seen some bullets bounce off the wall here and there, which at least lets us know that the Azov is nearby and they are fighting the Chechens a pretty good deal. We of course don't know the end result of what happened inside of this video, where the Chechens ended up getting shot or whether they pushed back the Azov a little. We don't really know. It was such a short snippet that we really just got to see that fire once again came in towards them, which is impressive and literally a feat to see as far as the Chechens videos go. So we're now going to move on from that to the next bit of news inside the city, where we've seen more Russian tanks being used in Mariupol. So I'm going to let y'all see that footage real quick. It's pretty self-explanatory, but here you go. And of course, guess what? They've got copyrighted music. So now I have to mute it. So I'm just going to give some commentary in its replacement. So this guy is saying something about the tank and what they're doing. It's probably something all made up. He's probably saying the Azov is literally jumping from building to building, trying to run away from them as the tank continues to take care of them. So he's going on for a really long time, just monologuing. You see the tank sitting there in the background waiting for his monologue to be over, apparently. And now it's fired. So apparently it wasn't waiting for his monologue to end. This man now has tinnitus, and now his ears are ringing too much for him to actually know what he's saying. So now he's probably saying some really silly stuff, like they're going to get the Azov back for what they did to the Moskva, like the Azov struck them or something. And once again, this is all assumptions. I don't actually know what the guy is saying at this point. So anyways, now we're finally going to see a little bit of tank action, at least from a camera on the tank. We can see it firing into a residential building at incredibly close ranges over and over. Now we can see that the perspective has changed, and it was firing into a building in the distance through some openings through the walls and such. We can now see it trying to move through the brick walls and such. And it looks like they almost got the barrel with some bricks. Barrels are very fragile, and if you kind of like run them into a building, they will get damaged to the point that the tank's gun cannot be used. So, looks like they're kind of watching out for that a little, but still they're getting it dangerously close most times. Okay, that time they actually got it straight through, threaded the needle in a way. So now we can see them getting even closer to the building they were firing at, which, honestly, if there were combatants in that building, why would you roll the tank closer to it? I would try and get further away, so that way they'd have a harder time trying to hit me with some kind of ATGM weapons. Nonetheless, this guy's getting even closer, which doesn't seem smart to me, but then again, the Russians never cease to surprise us with what they do, and so I'm going to let the video continue. And now you can see they're backing up through all the stuff they've run over in a way, and now they fired into another building, and now the video ends. Once again, it's just nothing more than kind of like incoherent footage with some commentary, and that's kind of the usual Russian fashion we've seen. They don't really make it look like it's a continuous thing, yet it looks like they try and sell it as such a thing. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news in Mariupol, where we can see more footage from Mariupol, from a drone actually. So here's the video. And of course there's copyrighted music. Now we can see another tank rolling through. Now we can see them hitting more residential buildings, it seems, kind of near the industrial zones of the city. And you can see a large amount of the city. Once again, we've known this for a while. Something like 85 to 90% of the city has been destroyed from the ongoing battle there. But it looks like they're not doing it any better, and they keep on continuing to destroy what has already been destroyed in a way. The city nearly looks like Stalingrad at this point. Every single building has been absolutely wrecked from this war, and I feel really sorry for that because they are going to have to pretty much rebuild this entire city from the ground up once the war is over. As we can see here, just more and more damage across the entirety of the city. We can see what looks like 2 BTR-82s moving down the sidewalk in a way, it seems, at a pretty high speed, with no infantry support. And now they're lighting up buildings for what seems to be no apparent reason. We couldn't really see if there was any fire coming from the buildings or if there were any combatants. And these BTRs just kind of rolled up into a place where we can't see any Russian infantry whatsoever, which is telling me that this may be somewhat staged in a way. So anyways, that's the end of the video. As you can see, the Russians may be winning, because otherwise they wouldn't be publishing so much news and information from the Mariupol area, because across the entirety of the rest of the front, I have to reiterate this every night because it is something important to note, they don't really put out a lot of footage from anywhere else around the front lines right now, which tells me that they're not really happy with what's going on, and so there's really no way that they can spin the story any kind of way to make it look like the Russians are winning anywhere. But that is not the case in Mariupol, because all the footage we get out of Mariupol is from them, and they're publishing a lot of it. More news comes out of Mariupol from the Russian side than anywhere else across the rest of the war, which tells me that they must be making some kind of progress, no matter if it's small or large, and so they feel confident enough that this will continue for them to spin the story that this is what's happening across all of Ukraine and that they're winning on all fronts in a way, but they only show Mariupol and try and paint the rest of the picture with this one example alone. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where of course we can see the Russians using more tanks in Mariupol. So here's the footage. Once again, we see a tank moving through the wreckage of the city. We can see the tank firing over and over. In usual Russian video fashion, they just kind of show us the same thing over and over and over. It's going to fire again, straight into the building. No infantry support as usual. And we don't see any Azov infantry in the film. And the building looks like it's so destroyed at that point that the top floors of the building aren't even usable. But now the Russians will ensure that it's not usable at all. And now it looks like the footage has looped. So with that, that's the end of that video. This also, if I was to take an observation of where this may be, it looks like it's around the Azovstal metallurgical plant. So this may be right outside of it. So if I was to say where this marker would be if it was placed accurately, it honestly looks like it's somewhere over here. Which, as y'all know, if it is over here, it's already not on the front lines. The Azov has been pushed into the Azovstal metallurgical plant. We know that for sure. And so they're firing into uninhabited buildings on the abandoned side of town, pretty much. So, once again, the Russians are at it kind of in a way with the propaganda footage as far as we can tell. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of video where we can see more tank footage from Mariupol. We've gotten more tank footage today from Mariupol than ever, which is something of an interesting fact. Let me make sure. This is actually the same video. Very weird. I think I copied that one twice. That was supposed to be a different video. So sorry about that, y'all. Unfortunately, we're going to have to move on to the next bit of news inside of Mariupol, where we can see Russian tanks operating Mariupol again. This is, I think, another video completely. Let me make sure. Yes, this is. So we see the tank moving up to the wall. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. But now it's going to roll through the wall. I think this may actually be footage from another perspective of the same tank we saw earlier. So now we can see it fire into an unknown location. This is the same guy. He's doing commentary again. Now the tank fires again. I gotta say, this stuff is so made up. You just can't even get past it. But the thing is this. We don't get any news out of Mariupol at all, rather than what the Russians are publishing right now. And it is showing the story, at least in some way, whether it's really fabricated on their end or not. And so I really have no choice. If I want to speak about Mariupol and show video evidence, this is the only video evidence that is coming out at the moment. So I have to kind of go with it. And so, you know, it's kind of sad. I wish the Azov was able to still publish videos on a very regular basis, but of course that may give away their positions and put them at a disadvantage. So unfortunately, we just have to deal with this. And also the other thing is that we always show and note that there is no fire in the distance in any of these videos. No infantry support for the tanks or anything. And we already saw from the last video that it may have been in an abandoned area of town where there are no enemy, Ukrainian combatants. And so that makes it clear that the Russians are fabricating most of this stuff. So anyways, I'm going to let the video continue. We now see the tank firing again. And that's the end of the video, of course. So, once again, a pitiful display of propaganda workmanship. It's very terrible. And if you're actually going to do propaganda, do it right. You know, I wish the Russians would actually take a page out of the book of countries that have done propaganda before. Even the Soviets did propaganda better than the Russian Federation. So they need to get on the ball and actually learn how to do it right instead of all this fake hanky-panky stuff that they keep on trying to push as real footage. So we're now going to move on from that bit of news, and we're now going to move on into the Azovstal itself, where today we've seen something incredibly rare. I believe this is actually the first time it's been documented on video, where a Tu-22, just for y'all to know, a Tu-22 I believe is a medium-range strategic bomber. So I'm going to show y'all that real quick. Let's see. It was the first supersonic bomber to enter production in the Soviet Union. That's a Tu-22 right there, but I think the ones we were wanting to talk about is the... It's definitely not that one. Sorry. I believe it's the Tu-22 M3. So let me show you all that real quick. This is the one that was dropping the bombs. This one right here, a Tu-22 M. These are strategic bombers. They actually have sweep wings, which is very interesting. If you remember, for everyone who doesn't really know the terminology of what a sweep wing is, if you remember Top Gun in the F-14s, and how their wings would kind of like fold in as they went faster or, you know, slower, that's the exact same principle that's being used on this Tu-22M. These planes, let me go down to the bottom and make sure I account this number accurately, have enough hard points to carry 53,000 pounds of ordnance. So it's an incredibly large bomb load, and we can see in this footage here that they actually used the Tu-22M3 today to carpet bomb the Azovstal. So here's the footage of that. Hopefully it will load. There we go. And you'll actually see the spread of carpet bomb. Well, not spread of carpet bomb. The spread of the bombs right down there in the plant. That's something we've never seen before. We've never actually heard of the Russians using strategic bombers to bomb targets. Usually it's some kind of cruise missile or an Su-34, but it looks like now after the sinking of the Moskva, they're starting to roll in the big guns in some places and trying to inflict the maximum amount of damage possible. Once again, I think the Azov is holding the Azovstal incredibly well, but we'll talk about Mariupol's situation and the situation along the entire southeast here in a second. So with that, we're now going to move on down into this video where we're going to see two Ukrainian soldiers get chased incredibly close by Russian artillery. They got out. It was a very close call, but they both got out fine. But nonetheless, here's the video. It's an incredibly interesting one to see. So as you can see here, the drone is panning around. You can see the two soldiers right here. They're walking along what looks like slag heaps. You can see the first blast of artillery hit over here. They hit the floor, it looks like, for a second, and now it looks like they're trying to continue on through this kind of like slag heap. It's not a slag heap, it's just kind of some kind of mound, but I'm not really sure what it's made of. Now we can see more mortar blasts hitting around them. It looks like some kind of light mortar, probably like an 81mm or something like that, if I was to take a guess. It's something small. It actually looks like they're climbing uphill of this. But anyways, they continue their climb. Well, actually, they may just be laying low to the ground to make sure that the shrapnel doesn't get them. But we can see that the mortar fire keeps on raining down around them, and they continue to trudge forward down this little path, trying to make sure that they can get out of the fire as best as possible. So there's been a little bit of a break in the fire from the mortars, and they continue to crawl down the path. So now we can get a larger shot of what's going on here. And it does, in fact, look like they were on some kind of pile. I'm not sure of what. A pile, a heap, whatever you'd like to call it, but it looks like they're on top of it, and they may be near the summit. That kind of looks like the path they were on, and they're trying to crawl down the length of it, probably to safety, but who knows. As we can see, mortar fire is raining down now on the side of the heap, instead of on top of them. And so it looks like the Russians, nope, they haven't given up. It's in fact adjusted and gotten a little bit closer to him again. And they continue to, what looks like, crawl forward on the heap and just try and get away from the mortar fire as best as possible. So now we can see, at that last bit of the video, the fire was nearly dead on, and it was just landing all around them, kind of in a circle. Unfortunately, the video ends there, so we don't know the fate of these Ukrainian soldiers and whether they whether they survived or escaped or not. But nonetheless, it was a very harrowing video because they were under mortar fire the entire time, and they're trying to escape from the top of this heap. And so with that, that's actually the end of the Mariupol news for now. And now we're going to talk about the situation here, because I've actually seen a lot of maps. I actually referenced my Mariupol map with a whole bunch of other ones. And while I believe that video evidence is the ultimate defining kind of like bit of evidence that you can get to show what's going on, there are a lot of maps coming out showing that the perimeter that the Azov and the 36th Infantry Brigade still controls is much smaller than what I'm showing on the map. I don't know where they've gotten the evidence for that. A lot of them appear to be pro-Russian maps, so I usually discredit them as kind of like a propaganda thing. But nonetheless, I don't really know the actual condition of the city. This is the best I can approximate from video footage, but still, it's not entirely accurate. There is a fog of war going on, and so we're not able to get perfect clear news coming out of the war, just because that's never the case. Mariupol can probably hold for a while longer, maybe a week, maybe even more. I don't want to put an exact date on it because they've held so well for so long, but I don't feel like this city will be much longer for this world. They've done an incredibly good job holding the city this long, and so if they lose at this point, I'm kind of expecting it. It's not going to be like a huge letdown or a loss of morale for the Ukrainians, I believe, because this city has held so long, it's kind of defied everyone's odds. I don't even think the Ukrainians expected the city to hold for this long, yet we're still sitting here watching it hold. So with that, we're now going to talk about the Eastern Front as a whole, and y'all kind of know what I've been saying. Also, I'm kind of taking a break here to adjust this map, because the map didn't update, and there was a little bit of a development here. There was a counterattack that reached Borova that the Ukrainians conducted not too long ago. And so let me make sure that that is once again adjusted down the Oska River. Right up here, and then we're going to talk about the situation up here. So that's what the front line kind of looks like now. Once again, I don't think the Russians actually have a leg to stand on right now. They may be trying to prepare to have a leg to stand on, but I think the Ukrainians are giving them a run for their money, and they're kind of pushing them back little by little. It's not a lot every day. It's not like a huge achievement. It's not any kind of blitzkrieg, but they're still pushing them back and chipping away at them here and there. While that is the case, the rain has stopped, and so the ground is beginning to dry over there, and that may mean that a Russian attack that they've been preparing for may be on the horizon within the next few days. Or it may not be at all, and they may have found out that their situation is as unattainable in the southeast as it was in the north, and now they're just trying to hold that land and hopefully wear down the Ukrainians and buy themselves some time. If that is the case, with the Ukrainians just really trying to hold their land and do limited counterattacks along the front lines, and now with the Russians supposedly just trying to hold the ground that they've gained, this may become a war of attrition where both sides are waiting for the other to run out of supplies or manpower, and then they give up. And that will be kind of like the, I guess, victory conditions if that is the direction that the war is heading in. I don't think it is, because I think the Russians will be looking for blood for the loss of the Moskva, so that way they can justify the loss of it to their citizens and at least mitigate the morale loss that has probably occurred because of that. If they can manage to claim something like an encirclement around Severodonetsk, or maybe a large encirclement that is on this next yellow barrier near Slavyansk, that would be a huge morale boost for the Russians. So I'm not sure if they'll be trying to attempt either one of those, but nonetheless, that is kind of the situation we're seeing develop at the moment. And so we're now going to move on to the news inside of the rest of the Eastern Front, the southern Eastern Front, where we can see on this map that there may be some kind of partisan activity, and this was supported by pictures, which is why I included it. As you can see here on this little map, this says here, reported Ukrainian partisan warfare, and you can see right where the mouse cursor is circling, they're saying that there's some kind of partisan activity in there. So that's incredibly interesting to me, because we haven't heard a lot about partisans at all, and they're not really uploading any of their activity if there is partisan activity. So that's incredibly interesting to know. But we did get pictures with this post showing captured Russians. But the thing to me is that these Ukrainians look really well turned out right here. They're actually in camouflage with weapons and such. And usually partisans are in civilian clothing, because it would give them away in a normal town if they're in military clothes. So I don't know if these pictures are exactly supporting the claim, but we can see that they've gathered up Russian credentials of these prisoners. And so I'm not entirely sure if that information is true or not, but I thought it was worth noting, because I was talking about way early on, within the first few weeks of the war, we're probably going to see a lot of partisan activity, and we haven't. The Russians don't have an incentive to show partisan activity, and the Ukrainians that are conducting the partisan activities don't really have a reason to upload it, because then they would be giving away their own faces and their actions and what they've done, which may give the Russians a heads up on what they're doing. So with that, we're now going to move out of Ukraine as a whole, and we're now going to move on into the rest of Europe, and then we'll cover a little bit of news we saw in the United States today. Starting off, it appears that in a military museum in Estonia, St. Javelin has made an appearance. They have set up an exhibit with a Javelin missile tube, not with a CLU. It looks like the CLU isn't here, but you can see that they actually have a little St. Javelin display up with this Javelin, and it looks like they also have a little poster explaining the Javelin to the people who visit this museum. It's an incredibly interesting display, and I think it is pretty cool that they have given St. Javelin kind of like its own exhibit in the museum. Very interesting to me that it's got that much popular influence at this point. So, gotta say, I hope y'all find that really interesting, because that was definitely interesting to me. And so we're now going to move on into Russia, where today we've seen a stolen drill bit for sale. This stolen drill bit, in the description, the woman who's selling it claimed that her husband brought it back from the special operation in Ukraine, which suggests that this was in fact stolen. Of course, they don't make any note of what the guy did over there. Obviously, they wouldn't. But nonetheless, we do know that Russians are stealing just normal household items from Ukraine and taking them back to Russia to try and sell them for money. A very skeezy practice on the part of the troops. We know that that the United States, even when they went over to Iraq and Afghanistan, weren't able to keep trophy weapons that they got off of enemy combatants, because I heard loads of stories from over there of amazing things like MP40s, Lee Enfields, Martini Henrys, and just antiques nearly, that people would pay top dollar for here in the United States, having to be destroyed because they couldn't take them home as war souvenirs. So that tells you how strict the United States was about bringing back anything back to the States that they got over there. But the Russians seem to pretty much be letting the soldiers go through and take whatever they want, and they are making that a form of payment for them in a way. It's really sickening, and it's just terrible. But it's not as sickening as the loss of human life. Still, it's something that I think should be looked into, and I think that these Russians should be found out and have their identities exposed online for what they're doing. So we're now going to move on further into the country, very far east. This is starting to get into the Siberia area, but in the city of Tyumen today, we've seen a train heading west loaded with military equipment, most of them grads. So I'm going to let y'all see the footage here. As you can see, a massive group of grads. So very interesting bit of film. It's showing that the Russians may be moving in replenishments of their forces that they may have lost in the war, or they're trying to amass even more forces for some kind of offensive in a way. And so finally, we're going to move on to our last bit of news for the night, where we've seen here in America, they're filling her up. They backed up a truck to, I believe, some kind of army depot, and they're starting to load javelins into the back of the truck. An incredibly good video to see, so I'm going to let y'all see it real quick. They're backing the truck up. Back it up just so. And then they pull out the forklift. Now this man is the stuff. He is forklift certified, and that is impressive. So anyways, they're moving the javelins into the warehouse. It looks like they're loading them onto pallets. I didn't get to watch this video all the way through. This is where I stopped it. It looks like they're loading them onto pallets to load onto aircraft to send over. So they're just rigging them up, getting them ready to load. Unfortunately, there's no audio to this video. I really hate that. But we can see that the United States is sending more aid. We have heard that we've actually sent over a very large percentage of our Javelin inventory, including CLUs and the rockets themselves, missiles if you'd like to call them. And so I'm very happy to see that. I'm very happy to see that we're actually publishing photos and pictures showing that we actually are doing this, because a lot of people have been throwing up the question, is the US even delivering on what they're promising? And the answer is yes, and you can see it in this video right here. So now we can see they're just moving them around a little. Now they're putting them onto some kind of, not exactly sure what kind of vehicle, well, system that is. For a second there, I actually thought it was one of those little vehicles at the airports to actually load the cargo onto the aircraft, but it appears not. But nonetheless, they did load up these javelins, ready to ship them out to Ukraine, and so it's wonderful to see that the United States is once again packing up, in gift wrapping, more weapons for Ukraine to take out the Russians with. And so with that, that is the end of the news for today. We've reached the end. If you're new to this stream and you've been watching for a while, I hope you all enjoyed the news. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because it does help out the channel an incredibly good deal, and it helps me reach more people. And so if you did enjoy it, help out others and make sure that they can see it as well. And so I thank you all so much for watching, and now we're going to move on to the questions for the night. And so before we get to them, how many super chats do we have, Matthew?
So let's see here. We have about 20 to 25.
All right, so we're going to allow the super chats to keep on coming. Usually we put in a cutoff, but I'll answer everyone's questions if y'all got one, and if y'all want to support the channel. And I would also like to make note that the super chats are meant to support the channel and what we do, and also future projects. And so I thank y'all all so much. If you want to buy merch at the moment, we are giving 10% of the profits on the merch to a charity, which we will be doing this Sunday. And so I just want y'all to kind of get the lay of the land with how the super chats work and the fundraising and all that sort of stuff. So I thank y'all all once again, and with that, on to the questions.
And first up, we have a very generous $128 donation from R2. Thank you very much for that generous donation. He says, worth it and well done.
Well, I thank you very much for the huge donation, and I'm glad that you find it worth that much. One thing that I'm going to kind of go over my philosophy a little bit about how I run my videos. I cut all the ads off of them completely. If you ever go back onto a video and there's an ad running on it, that's because there's a copyright claim, and then the copyright holder gets to run ads on it. But I never run ads. My philosophy is that if people enjoy the content, they can support the channel. And if they don't enjoy the content, they don't lose any skin in the process. They don't have to watch ads and get aggravated with it or anything. And so, if people enjoy the content, it will survive. And if people don't, it will die. And I'm not really trying to force it or anything. So I thank you so much for finding it worth such a huge amount on the donation mark. And so thank you once again. It does mean a lot. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $50 donation from Brad. Thank you very much for your donation. That is very generous, and we very much appreciate it. Excuse me. Next up, we have a $10 donation from Robert McIver, who says, "Good job, boys."
Well, thank you very much. Good job to you for watching the stream, and I'm very glad that you do enjoy it. And so with that being said, on to the next question.
And the next one is from Ryan Hill, who puts in a $10 donation and says, "Haven't been able to catch a live stream yet, but I listen every morning/evening to the stream on the way to and from work. I've got to agree with last night's comment about Spectrum Internet. They are the worst.
Yeah, they are. I mean, like, I've got to tell you, they have common internet outages, and it's really a blessing that we haven't had that many internet outages on stream yet. We've had like 2, I think, and so it's not terrible. Like for Spectrum, it's like it's a miracle that it happens only that little, because it seems like it's almost daily here that we get some kind of internet outage. So thank you so much for agreeing with us, because well, I don't want to say I hate them. I extremely dislike their level of service they provide as far as internet access. So I thank you so much for agreeing with us. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Christian Dubois, who says, with Ukraine fully mobilized for war, do you foresee Russia needing to increase mobilization to push Ukraine out of the Donbas?
I don't think the Russians will be ramping up mobilization. They currently do have an army of 730,000 troops. Probably most of those are relegated to support roles, and I think a large amount of them don't even have operational equipment. And that's why we haven't seen the Russians commit anything else to this war, although it's about 2 months in now, and considering how poorly it's gone, they should have thrown in a lot of extra muscle much earlier, probably around the end of the first month, to try and put this war to a quick end. So I don't really think they have the ability to add any more troops to this, mainly because of the logistical situation. It's not that they're lacking the armor or anything, it's that they're lacking the ability to supply the armor and the infantry with the equipment they need and the supplies they need to keep a war going. I think that's really their limiting factor here in this war, and I think that's why a war with Finland won't happen, although we hear that there are troops amassing on the Finnish border in a smaller number at the moment. I think they just don't have the logistical ability to support any of those forces, and it probably took a lot of them mustering a load of effort to even get them to the Finnish border in the first place. So I hope that answers the question a pretty good deal. I think once again it kind of relies on the logistics, and they don't really have a good logistical chain or any kind of support for it. And we know that their vehicle manufacturing has taken a hit, and I also think they'll include their military vehicles. So we know that they're not getting a lot of replacements. They've had to requisition a lot of civilian vehicles, and that hasn't even filled the gap. So I think they just can't really add any extra firepower down here to try and really push their objectives in the Donbass, just because they don't have the logistical support to ensure that those additional forces will succeed. So I hope that does answer the question in a way, and I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $12 donation from I'm Not a Teacher, who says, I've been watching religiously since day 14. What kind of bombers do the Russians have? And I was under the impression they don't have any impressive bombers from Ukrainian air defense systems that could easily be picked off.
I don't really know how to address the last part, so unfortunately I don't really think I'll be able to answer that one. But as far as strategic bombers that they have a few actually. I'll pull that up. Strategic bomber fleet. I know of 2. They have the Tu-160 and the Su-22. I think they have some smaller bombers. Strategic bomber fleet, Russia. And let's just get a specific breakdown of it. Let's see. Russian strategic bomber force, according to the Diplomat. Oh, this looks like a tabloid. We're leaving. Strategic bomber fleet. Let's see. Russian Air Force. That'll probably get us a better figure here. Probably because they'll just send us straight to Wikipedia. There we go. So let's see if they got a list of aircraft through here. They do. So if I had to qualify anything as strategic bombers, we're going to cut out the smaller ones like the Su-34s and the Su-24s. And we're just going to go with the large bombers, the large ticket aircraft. First off, it looks like we have the Tu-160, of course. The Illusion, that's some kind of control aircraft. Let's see here. Doesn't really look like they showed us all of them, because they have Tu-22s. Let me go down here and just look through this list. Let's see. Multi-role fighter bombers. So they have the Tu-95, very dated. This thing was first flown in 1952 and has been used for an incredibly long time, but they do run a fleet of 42 of these aircraft. They have Tu-22Ms, they have 66 of those, and then they have 15 Tupolev 160s, which are very similar, at least in appearance. I know they're probably very different technologically, but they are very similar in appearance with the B-1 Lancer, which is an aircraft that the United States operates. And I'll show you all that real quick, just to give you all an idea. I'm not really sure who copied who here, but I feel introduction 1986. Maybe we can get a figure on the Tu-22. First flight. Introduction was in 1987. 1 minute. First flight was 1974. First flight of this one. Okay, so the Russians copied the Americans apparently, and the design of that aircraft, because they're incredibly similar, at least in theory, of how they're supposed to be used. This is a sweep wing variable geometry strategic bomber, and then this one is also the same. But nonetheless, that's really the three main strategic bombers they have: the Tu-95, the Tu-22, and the Tu-160. And then they have a pretty sizable fleet of medium-sized bombers like Su-34s and Su-24s. So I hope that answers the question in a way, and I thank you so much for the support, and I thank you for sticking around and enjoying so many of these streams. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another $10 donation from Not a Teacher, who says, "Sorry for the spelling errors. I'm driving." Wow, you typed all that while you were driving? Wow, you're better than I would have been.
I was thinking that he's probably run into a guardrail at this point. But thank you so much for the support, and I thank you for asking the question nonetheless. I mean, if you're driving and typing all that up, that's pretty wild to me that you did all that. So we're totally fine with the spelling errors. Hope you drive safe. Make sure not to get distracted too much with the stream. But I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from James Lynn, who says, "With the Ukraine all the way up to the Russian eastern border near Sumy, they're within 150 to 200 kilometers of Belgorod and Kursk. Good opportunity to totally disrupt Russian logistics with a deep strike."
That is true. If we were to go from the Ukrainian border to Kursk, I think it's actually shorter than 150 kilometers. It's 53 miles, which I think equates into like 70 or 80 kilometers. And then from the area around Sumy to Belgorod, it's about 70 miles. But straight in from Kharkiv, where we've seen the helicopter attack get committed before. Let me get rid of that one. From kind of like the center of Kharkiv to Belgorod, it's only a 37-mile trip. So I think that they are set up and poised to do some very impressive raids on Kursk and Belgorod. We've already seen that the Ukrainians struck the First Army Armory a long time ago, and the helicopter raid was a success on Belgorod. So they have been doing it, and I think now that their front lines have been shortened so much to Kursk and Belgorod, that helicopter raids, like we've seen before, may be even easier to conduct. So I thank you so much for the support and bringing that up. That is a very interesting thing to address. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Martin Bermudez, who says, "How long do you think the weather in the east will last? Great job, guys, and Slav Ukraine."
Thank you so much for the support, and I think the good weather will not last long. Let's pull that up. Ukraine weather, and just as a reference, we'll type in Kharkiv. Well, we'll just type in Kharkiv weather. Oh boy, look at that, y'all. It's raining every day of the week in Kharkiv specifically. Oh my lord. Now that I didn't know. We heard that there was going to be 2 days of heavy rain and then it would be intermittent rain after that. But today was a precipitation chance of 90%. Tomorrow will be 40. Well, actually, wait a minute. I think tonight's Friday, isn't it? Yeah, it's Friday. So tomorrow is 90%. The day after that's 40%, 90%, 80%, 80%, 60%, 30%, and then 50%. So it's like monsoon season right now in Kharkiv, and I'm assuming that it's probably like that around the rest of the southeastern front. So let's pull up the weather in, what's another, Severodonetsk. And let's look at the weather there. So tomorrow will be a 2% chance of rain, so the ground will have a little bit of time to dry, and the temperature will be a little bit warm, so it will help with the evaporation, but not too warm. The day after that will be 50% chance of rain, 50%, 80%, 80%, 70%, 40%, and then on Saturday it'll be a 20% chance of rain, and the temperature will be 68 degrees. So that may help to evaporate the monsoon that has occurred over the past 5 or 6 days or so. But nonetheless, we can see that the weather down there is incredibly poor. So I actually think that there won't be a Russian counterattack anytime soon if they're waiting for the weather to improve. But once again, we know that they're incompetent, so they may not be waiting for the weather to improve, and this attack could be launched within days, right in the middle of the monsoon, and their main force of equipment, the armored vehicles, will be stuck on the paved roads again. So I thank you so much for bringing that up. That was a very great thing to go take a look at. And so with that being said, I hope that answers the question, and we're gonna move on to the next one.
And the next one is from Rich Hogan, a longtime channel supporter who puts in a $10 donation. He says, in regards to the artillery piece, howitzers were on the most recent shopping list of goodies we sent the Ukrainians, and it did not look like one of ours.
I do have to agree. It didn't look like one of ours. It looked like a bit of a smaller caliber artillery piece. Unfortunately, also I saw that everyone told me that that little kind of like bayonet looking thing on the front of the muzzle brake is actually used to tow the piece, which is incredibly interesting to me. And I thank y'all all so much for giving me that information, because that's something I didn't know that was used for. But nonetheless, I do agree they didn't look American, but I hope that the American M777s do make it over there eventually, because I believe that we actually said we'll be sending some of those over to Ukraine. So I thank you so much for the support and pointing that out. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question, or more of a comment, from Kai Rek, who puts in a $10 donation and says, yo.
Yo. I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from 21 Grams, who puts in a $10 donation and says, hearing the Ukraine soldiers say, God bless America, made my whole night. Slava Ukraine, and God bless Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini. And yeah, that was really cool to see them say God bless America. It was really weird coming out of like them with their accent. It's like, oh, that's weird. But that was super cool to hear, because it's cool to know that they do like what America is trying to do for them, at least as far as we're willing to go right now. So I thank you so much for the support, and I do agree that what made my day as well when I saw it, and I was like, that's got to go on stream. So with that being said, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a $10 super chat from Flying Potato, who says, great job with the Kharkiv pronunciation and all. Just one quick note, the accent falls on A. It's Kharkiv, basically.
Very interesting. Unfortunately, I would like to correct my pronunciations of the Ukrainian towns, but at some point I've just got to say, I'm going to butcher them. I mean, like I can try and work on that, but if I work on that, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the background that will catch on fire. So I will try and work on it. Make no mistake. I will try and make sure that I stop butchering the names of these cities and I actually say them properly. But it will take some time. So everyone bear with me. But I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from longtime channel supporter BC Skyman, who puts in a $10 donation. He says, my wife's aunt's home was damaged in Vishnev near Kiev by a missile strike last night. She survived, and so many suffering. Did you hear about the farmer that hit a mine while plowing his field?
I did not hear about that story. There's a lot of stories that happened today. Actually, I was kind of drowning in news, and so it was very tough to pick the ones we got. So I'm not really sure if I saw that one or not, because I saw so much and tried to pick the most interesting bits. But nonetheless, I didn't hear that story, sadly. But I'm very happy that your grandmother did make it through the attack fine. Of course, missile attacks are incredibly dangerous and very lethal. And if one landed incredibly close to her, it's just a stroke of luck that she wasn't injured. And so I'm very glad to hear that. And I hope that she continues to stay in good health and safety, because a war is a dangerous place. And so I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Simon Gardner. Thank you very much for your donation. After that, we have a $10 donation from longtime channel supporter Captain Chris1220, who says, sorry if you already explained this, but could you summarize what Russia actually declaring war would mean? I was surprised to see this in the news and assumed war was technically declared. Thanks.
I think, if I remember correctly, Matthew, didn't Putin declare war like weeks ago as well? Like he came out and said, "Okay, it's a war now." Didn't he do that like weeks ago?
Yeah, so he already declared war. They started off by saying it was a special military operation, which obviously it wasn't. It was already a war, but they, technically declared war a couple weeks ago.
Okay, I thought you meant like they were saying that tonight after the attack on the Moskva and the sinking of it. It really doesn't mean anything. They really didn't change what they were doing. It still had the same initial invasion force committed to the war, and honestly, really nothing more than a symbolic statement of it. It didn't change anything at all on the ground. In fact, things started to become worse for the Russians after that was declared. So I thank you very much for the support, but that's kind of like the situation that's developed after that. It was really just a kind of a symbolic thing. It went from them thinking they could waltz through and win the country in a matter of days to, oh no, we've been here for like 20 days or so and nothing's improving. So now we're going to call it a war so that way we can try and like change the narrative of how this was supposed to go. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way why they did that. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up here, we have a $10 donation from Benji, who says, "Do Ukrainians modify vehicles when they steal them from the Russians? Thank you, and Slava Ukraine."
It looks like they don't modify them a large deal. I think the modifications that we kind of see them doing inside of their repair shops and tractor factories, if you want to call them that, is really just to make sure that they're still in running condition and they're kind of like conducting some minor repairs on the vehicles. We don't really see them doing a lot of modifying to them. I think that they really don't have the time nor the supplies to really just go through and refit these tanks to make them kind of like to a Ukrainian standard in a way, because the Ukrainian standard, as far as I know, at least with the T-84s, is actually a bit of a high, if not higher standard than what most Russian main battle tanks are held to. So I just don't think they have the time to go through and like upgrade them or refit them or anything. They're really just repairing them and putting them back into service almost in the Russian configuration, but usable for the Ukrainians. So I thank you very much for the support. That's kind of what I've been understanding from the situation with the repairing and refitting from what it seems on video in a way. So I hope that does answer the question as far as the information I've got. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And I'm noticing a lot of people saying that Russia hasn't declared war yet. I am almost 100% certain that they have. Enforcer, I'm not sure if you want to double check that or not, potentially.
Yeah, we are checking that. So 19 hours ago, according to the Mirror, which I believe is some kind of tabloid, they say full-scale World War III has now begun, which it hasn't. Russian state TV declares. Let's see. I don't really know about that one. Let's see. Let's check out this video here from NDTV. Let's see. Russian announced a military operation with explosions, warning full-scale invasion was underway. So that was actually on the day of invasion. That was the 24th. So it wasn't actually a war. He was calling it a special operation then. But I swear that I saw a while ago, and I think it was actually on one of the streams, that Putin did come out and say it's no longer a special military operation, it's now a war. And then that's when they ramped up the bombings on Kyiv for a while, and they really tried to push that city, and then they managed to lose it, like lose the entire offensive over the next few weeks. So, maybe my information was wrong, but I explicitly remember that there was a point where Putin came out and said, this is now a war. But I may be wrong with that. So I thank you very much, everyone, for bringing that up. We will, of course, try and look into that a little bit more and see if we can get some more information on that. But that's what I've been going off of so far because, I've been here every day, and I remember explicitly hearing him say that at some point. But anyways, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is an $11 donation from Level 70, who says, how close are the Ukrainians to taking back Kherson?
The Ukrainians, I can't really tell. I don't actually think they're close to retaking Kherson because they've been stuck on the outskirts of the city for a week or two now. And so I think that offensive is kind of stalled in a way. Maybe the Ukrainians are trying to regroup for a renewed offensive, or maybe the Russians have just stopped it entirely and now they're just trying to hold their ground there. I'm not entirely sure, but it doesn't really look like anything as far as progress is being made in the Kherson area. So I hope that answers the question in a way, at least from the information we've been able to get, or the lack thereof that's been coming out of the Kherson area. So I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a $10 donation from G. Hill, who says U.S. is to send more weapons, but questions are how fast to get there before it's too little too late, and do they have enough people to fight after the 1,000 soldiers that surrendered?
Is he talking? Oh, can you rephrase that one to me in a way, because I don't really think I was following it all too well.
So he's saying U.S. is to send weapons, but is it going to be too little too late? And do they have enough people to fight after 1,000 soldiers have surrendered?
1,000 soldiers surrendering in this war is kind of like a drop in the bucket. I'm assuming that the Ukrainian forces at this point have an actual fighting force of around 220,000 troops. You know, that includes the TDFs and also the regular army. And also, the support isn't going to be too little too late. The United States has been funneling in support since the opening days of this war, so it's not really like a thing that they're getting ready to send and it's going to be like, oh, it's too late. You know, if it had been 2 days sooner, they could have turned the war around. Nah, it's not really like that, because they've been sending it in regularly at this point now. That's why you see javelins still being used in videos here and there, is because we still have a steady supply of javelin ammunition heading into Ukraine for the Ukrainians to use, among other weapons that we've been providing to them. So I don't think it's too little too late, and also I don't really think 1,000 troops surrendering really has much of an impact on anything. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next one is from Chiburska1, who puts in a $10 donation and says, "Don't let my wife know I spent $10. Slava Ukraine."
Slava Ukraini, and we'll make sure to not let her know. So thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, on to the next question, but very quietly so we don't get his wife's attention.
All right. And next up is a $10 donation from Rich Hogan, a longtime channel supporter. He says, "Great content and keep up the good work."
And I thank you so much for the support. I think he's been a return supporter, actually. And so I thank you so much for returning and enjoying the streams and also supporting the channel. It does help us to continue doing what we do. And it's also helping us to try and create the video in the background that we're still working on. We actually wrote up a script today. Well, actually, Matthew wrote one up, and then I went through and started to revise it. So we're almost done with the next script today, and it's looking like it's coming together really well. So I hope everyone's really excited to see that. Hopefully it'll do incredibly well. Because it's our first video and we want that thing to be a banger. So I thank you all so much for the support once again. And with that being said, on to the next question. Almost butchered that statement.
And the next one up is from Duncan VR, who puts in an $8 donation and says, "Ukraine 2022, Russian warship postage stamp soldier, one finger salute. Look up on eBay. These are selling for big money to sellers in Ukraine. Did not know their post was still operating."
Very interesting. I would pull that up on stream, but I'm not really sure if any of my personal information would be divulged doing that, because sometimes I go to other pages and it like shows something like my name or something like that. So I would do it on stream, but I'm kind of scared that that may happen on eBay. So I thank you so much for the support and sharing that info with us. And one thing that I find interesting, but I wouldn't want to like delve into, is that a lot of people create war merchandise. Like, it's not merchandise to support their channel. It's like stuff that's entirely revolving around Ukraine, and they actually have like no connection to the war, like the soldiers on the ground or anything. And then they just make the merchandise and it sells like hotcakes. And I don't really like that. It feels like war profiteering. Like, it's one thing to create merchandise for a channel, but it's another thing to make merchandise for the war, if you see what I'm saying. So, you know, if people are doing that on eBay, if I'm understanding it the right way, I don't really like the idea of people kind of like copying design, kind of stealing money from the Ukrainians and then selling it on eBay for a huge profit, because it just doesn't really jive with me. But I thank you so much for the support and sharing that info with us. And so with that, on to the next question.
And the next one up is from James Menard, who puts in an $8 donation, and he is a longtime channel supporter as well. He says, "I very much appreciate you, Matt and team. What charity will you be promoting on Sunday? Also, cardigan corgis are very cute, and I think they would benefit from an image comparison."
Oh man, you're gonna make me do that? Alright, chat. I'm going to show you the Pembroke Welsh Corgi, the finest dog on earth. Here's a picture of one. Right there. Look at that thing. Just a beautiful dog. And then we'll pull up the cardigan corgi. I mean, I'm not trashing on it too bad. It's just that the cardigans aren't exactly what I like in a dog, you see, because this is a Pembroke Welsh Corgi. this is a cardigan corgi. The cardigan kind of looks more like a hound in a way, in my opinion, while the Welsh corgis, the Pembroke ones, look more like a fox, if you see what I'm saying. So, side-by-side comparison, that's about the best I can get flipping from tab to tab. Hopefully that gives you all a good idea. But I think the Pembroke Welsh corgi is the best corgi. Moving on from that, what was the first part of his question so I can make sure to address it real quick?
He said, "What charity will you be promoting on Sunday?"
I think we're not exactly sure yet. That's something I kind of come up with closer to the stream date because I try and find a charity that kind of revolves around what's going on that night. Like usually if something terrible has happened, like there's evidence of war crimes against citizens and people getting injured and stuff, I usually try and go with a humanitarian cause that its purpose is to support people. If there's like, support injured people and try and get them surgery and such things. If the news is revolving around refugees heavily that day, I try and make a fundraiser for a nonprofit that kind of revolves around helping refugees, but it really depends, and so it's something that'll probably be decided tomorrow or early in the morning on Sunday as the first bits of news rolls in. So unfortunately, we haven't decided it yet, but that news will probably come out at the end of tomorrow night's stream or early in the morning on Sunday. So I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way, and so with that being said, on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $7 donation from Spaced Out Babes, who says, "How many leaf springs were lost on the Moskva and are now at the bottom of the sea?"
We're not exactly sure. We know that they actually had some leaf springs on it. They were trying to add extra armor to the ship by putting leaf springs on the side of it. And so I'm not really sure how many went down with it and how many they had on the ship once it had been refitted. Once again, that's a joke. Don't want anyone taking that seriously. But I thank you so much for the support, and I like the little joke you made right there. And so with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And moving on to the next one, we have a $20 donation from John Gamber, who says, "What was the actual story of the missile factory in Ukraine hit by Russian missiles after the Moskva hit? Any damage reports? And I listen every evening, and thanks for your hard work."
Unfortunately, I did hear about the missile attack in Kyiv, but I couldn't really get enough news myself to be happy with the damage reports and such things like that. I really wish, of course this would be impossible for them to do, but I really wish that the Ukrainians could maybe give like full page paper reports on the damages, but I know that no one's got the time to do that right now, and that's asking way too much. So unfortunately, I didn't really have any kind of damage reports on it. We do know that it was hit, but until we actually get some kind of idea on the actual numbers and the actual level of damage that was caused, I'm not wanting to report on it all too much right now. So unfortunately, I can't get you that information. I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one, but we do know that it was hit. And I thank you so much for watching every night. It does mean a lot to us, and also the support helps us to run the channel. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Just P, who says, "Thanks for the hard work."
And thank you so much for supporting the channel and helping us to continue doing the hard work we do here. It does mean a lot. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from No Fear 4x4, who says, "Thank you, Enforcer and mods, for all your work. The Ukraine Postal Service should sell a stamp in the USA to raise money for their war and humanitarian needs."
That's an incredibly good idea. Maybe what would be interesting is if they could send those to the U.S. Postal Service, and then the U.S. Postal Service will pretty much run a fundraiser through those stamps where people can buy them from the post office. They accumulate the money into pretty much a fund, and once a certain amount of time passes, like, every 3 weeks or so, they send over the bundle of money over to Ukraine, which can then be handed over to whatever government institution will then redistribute it, like the Ministry of Defense or such. But I think that's an incredibly good idea, and I hope that they would do something like that. So I thank you so much for the support and the great idea. That was actually a really good one. I liked it. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from longtime channel supporter OG Wakanobi, who says, "Enforcer got a shout out on Funker a couple of days ago. Great job, guys." Did we really? We really got a shout out over there?
That's pretty cool. I don't know which one
That's
of y'all.
pretty cool.
I don't know which one of y'all did that. But that's pretty cool. That's pretty neat. So thank you for sharing that with us. That's really cool to know that that happened. So thank you so much for the support. And I don't know, maybe that'll happen more often or something. That would be cool. But anyways, that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Robert McIver again. Thank you very much for your continued support of the channel. Up next, we have a $5 donation from longtime channel supporter Orlos the Druid, who says, the art piece was Soviet D-30. The bayonet thing is the towing tongue for pintle hitch.
I think we already covered that one a little bit, but I do thank you for giving an exact detail of what those pieces on the muzzle brake are for and kind of what their purpose is. So I thank you so much for the support and sharing that information with us. And so with that being said, on to the next question.
And OG Wakanobi is back again with another $5 donation. He says, we saw another Wolverines tag on a blown out tank today, Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini, and that's really cool to know because they spray painted one of them near Kyiv with a Wolverines thing on it, and so now they're doing it another time. I hope that that's in homage of the original Red Dawn movie and not the remake, because the remake was terrible, and I bet everyone can agree with me on that one. It went from school kids, you know, they had no military experience, conducting guerrilla operations on the Soviets that invaded the country, which was a cool concept. And, you know, like, it's pretty relatable that just a bunch of average school kids kind of got caught in that situation. And then in the remake, it went to Chris Hemsworth, who was some kind of Marine veteran or something, and acted like he was preparing for this moment his entire life when it happened. And it just didn't really feel right. Nothing about that second remake, like, hit emotionally. And I just didn't like it. I didn't really vibe with it, but I'm sure that some of y'all liked it more so than the original. But the original is like the best one in my opinion. But anyways, I thank you so much for the support, and it is cool to see the Wolverines tags keep on reappearing on other vehicles around the country. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from Who Knew Bab1, who says, I heard the Moskva cruiser may have been carrying nukes when it sank. Ukraine can recover those nukes, and it's game changer. Ukraine would now be a nuclear nation.
I do agree. The thing was is that at the beginning of the stream, I was going to suggest that that could be a thing, but the fact is that the Moskva probably sank somewhere around this marker right here, and to go out there and try and salvage the nukes, they would have to conduct an operation that would probably last days, floating ships around the right above the wreck of the Moskva, trying to send down divers or submarines to somehow recover these nuclear missiles out of their silos. That would be something very hard to conduct, considering that most of the Black Sea Fleet, well, really all of the Black Sea Fleet, minus 3 ships, is entirely intact and would probably attack and destroy those recovery vessels out there trying to get the nuclear weapons off of it. But if somehow they could manage that, that would be a miracle in a way, and it would change the face of the war for Ukraine, because then they could start threatening nuclear destruction against the Russians if they do not withdraw and come up with some kind of peace agreement. So I thank you so much for the support, and that would be an interesting turn of events, although I believe it may be a little bit impractical. But once again, we can all dream and hope for a time like that. So thank you very much for the support, and with that being said, how many Super Chats do we have left?
Let's see. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have about 10.
All right, and with that, on to the next question.
And the next one is from RDY4THDLL, who puts in an $8 donation and says, we know Russia is regrouping for a push into the east and south. Knowing we don't see the Ukrainian troop movements, is the enforcer confident Ukraine can repel the coming offensive?
From what I can assume, from what's going on right now, the Ukrainians are in an incredibly good position across, I would say, at least half of the front lines right now to conduct counterattacks of their own and actually cut off large Russian pockets if they are able to manage a decent amount of momentum and keep their offensives moving over an incredibly large amount of mileage over a short amount of time. So I think from what I can tell, and I'm not going to go into detail because that could be giving away things, and we know that the Russians copied my map once at least, but I think that the Ukrainians are actually in a pretty good position to defend in most parts of the front line, except for a few areas. I'm not going to go into where, but in some other areas, it looks like they're actually poised to mount impressively good counterattacks in a way. So I hope that does answer the question in a way without giving away too much. Once again, I don't like it. I'm gonna just say I don't like it when people act like they are the holder of forbidden knowledge. You know, I've run into people like that, and you can ask them something, and they'll be like, "Oh, that's top secret," but it's public information nearly, and I don't want to come off like that. But the thing is that I've been so right on some of the things I've said on this channel, and they've turned out to be true. I'm scared of saying things now that may be giving away what the Ukrainians are doing, because based off of how accurate I've been with what the Russians will do, I'm scared that if I'm that accurate with the Ukrainians and there's someone in the Russian government watching this, they could just call up someone and be like, "Hey, I think the Ukrainians are going to do this," and it could turn out to be true. But then again, you know, that's like a pipe dream. I don't think the Russians focus on this channel all too much. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address what I'm thinking about the situation on the southeastern front. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Hickory Hillside, who says, 1 month ago, in a way, I was turned off by the pro Ukraine commentary, but I can't find a better news source. So, with that being said, thanks.
No problem at all. I don't really know why people would be turned off by pro-Ukrainian commentary, because the thing is that there really is no neutral way to look at this war, you know, considering the amount of war crimes the Russians are committing. There's really no way you can just take a neutral stance and be like, well, you know, the Russians got a point and the Ukrainians got a point too. I mean, like, you know, can't really do that. The Russians really have no point to this war, and the Ukrainians are in a defensive war. And usually the people who are on the defensive are usually in the right in terms of trying to defend their sovereignty, although there is certain exceptions where that is not the case. But I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy it, and I'm glad that you find the quality of news we deliver here to be of a high regard. So thank you once again, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up here, we have a question from longtime channel supporter Diffuse56. He says, I have to leave a bit early tonight, so I may or may not be here by the time you get to this, but I hope all who support Ukraine have an excellent evening.
And I hope that they're all blessed with leaf springs as well. So I thank you so much for the support, and I do hope that everyone that does support Ukraine has a great night tonight. So thank you once again. If you're still around, I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, the famous phrase, we're on to the next question.
And up next is a $8 super chat from Jonathan Toe, who says, Russia is claiming some of their border villages have been shelled by Ukraine. How much truth is there to this, as Russia is using this as an excuse to increase attacks on Kyiv?
I don't really know how true they are. We don't have any video evidence from the Russians showing that that is something that's occurred. And so, in light of a lack of evidence, I would say it's probably not happening, because if it was, the Russians would be all over it, filming it and showing it. But we don't have any of that. So I don't really think they're happening as of now. If we get more proof and evidence in the future to show that they are, then I'll change that statement. But right now, I think that that's not true. And the Ukrainians really have no reason to bombard random villages on the other side of the border, because unlike the Russians, who have an unlimited supply of Soviet-era ammo and equipment, the Ukrainians aren't in the same position, so they don't really have the ability to just throw artillery shells in large volumes across the border at civilian targets, because they really provide no advantage to them to do that. So I thank you so much for the support. That's kind of my stance right now with the information, well, the lack of information that we've gotten from that. And so, with that being said, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a $5 donation from Dino Ress, a longtime channel supporter, who says, Swedish Valhund is best and cutest herding dog in the world.
Oh man, I'm so glad you brought that up. I actually saw that comment a little bit earlier. But yeah, the Swedish Valhund is pretty much just the wolf version of the corgi. It actually predates the corgi, and they look so cool. Just look at that thing. It's like a small wolf. We actually wanted to get one of these a while ago, but the thing is that we couldn't find one. But nonetheless, they are really cool looking little dogs. I like them a lot. But I thank you so much for the support. They're pretty much literal wolf corgis. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $36 donation from longtime channel supporter JuneBug72, who says, in honor of the first night of Passover and Shabbat, Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini. And I think that a lot of people in Ukraine will respect that it is the first night of Passover, because we do know that there is a decent Jewish population living inside of Ukraine. Not incredibly large. There's not really a lot of large Jewish populations living in continental Europe anymore due to what happened in World War II. A decent amount of them were wiped out, pretty much exterminated. But there is still a sizable portion of Jewish people living inside of Ukraine, and so I'm sure that they do enjoy that it is the first night of Passover, and I hope they are able to celebrate the holiday generally uninterrupted in a way. So I thank you so much for the support, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, I want to recognize a $5 donation from Brian Butcher. Thank you very much for your donation. And next up, we have a $5 donation from Ninos GLG, a longtime channel supporter, who says, "Where are Russia's new and updated equipment? Seems like all you see is this old World War II equipment sent, considering they have great engineers and scientists."
That's a great question. The thing is that the Russians, while they presented a picture to the West that they had modernized their military and it was incredibly advanced, I'd actually read up on it a lot about 2 years ago and realized that the Russians only had that on paper and in pictures. Most of their forces are still very mid-Cold War in terms of technology and what they're able to use, and then a lot of the equipment that they've been sending in, which is true, looks like some kind of World War II surplus for the most part. So I do agree, it's very weird that they keep on sending that in, but when you actually know the situation, the Russians just simply have an outdated military. That's really just a rundown of it, and so it's kind of inevitable that such a backwater military that's been presented to be incredibly modern will start to send in old surplus weapons, and it'll be shocking to most of the world, but people who were reading up on it and actually knew the true situation of the Russian military beforehand will not really be surprised by it. It's in fact nearly expected at this point. So I thank you so much for the support, and that's kind of my stance on that. I highly suggest that y'all do read books about the Russian army and how it rebuilt after 1991, because it gives you a very good idea that while they have been showcasing a lot of their modern weaponry to the world, they don't have a lot of it to actually make a meaningful difference in how they fight or the overall technology of their military. So I thank you so much for the support, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Josh, who says, "Hi, Enforcer. I've been watching since early in the war and wanted to thank you for your detailed and dedicated coverage. Glory to Ukraine and glory to the heroes."
And I thank you so much for the support. It's really cool to know that we have a lot of people who do support after watching since the beginning of the early war, and it's really cool to know that a lot of people do enjoy it, and every once in a while decide to chip in to help us ensure that we can keep on doing what we're doing. So I thank you so much for the support. It does mean a lot, and once again, glory to Ukraine and glory to the heroes. Do have to agree, I can't believe that they've been going on for 51 days at this point. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another $5 donation from Dino Ress, who says, "Valkyries Valhuns in Northern Illinois. They are on Facebook, and that's where we got ours."
Oh, cool. Dude, that's really cool. They have a Valhund. I don't know. I mean, like, the dogs are really tough, like, to take care of when they're puppies, and I don't have time at all. Like, I spend, 60 hours a week on this, somewhere around the mid to high 50s, really getting close to 60 hours a week running this, and then whenever we throw in filming, which adds like a whole other 12 hours, that can go up to like 70 hours a week. So I don't have time to take care of a puppy, sadly, but I would kill for a Valhund, honestly. I love corgi types of dogs, corgi breeds. They're really neat. I just love them to death, and they got great personalities, and I'm sure you know that since you got a Valhund. So I thank you so much for the support and letting me know that little bit of information. And so with that being said, on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from G Hill, who says, "I decided to get a coffee mug for my every morning coffee date with the Enforcer. Slav to Ukraine."
Slava Ukraini. And also, very cool. We actually got our coffee mug here not too long ago. I didn't really try and make like a selfless plug on stream about the thing. The whole reason we bought the merch, well, I bought the merch myself. I bought a phone case, a coffee mug, and a shirt, was to ensure that the quality of the stuff that was being sent out was good, because I don't want to send out low quality stuff. Everything that this channel does should be high quality at best. We should be trying to put as much effort into making sure that everything is good and people will be satisfied with it as possible. And so I got the mug, and I gotta say, like, not to make this into a plug or anything, but that thing is high quality, and for some reason it can hold a lot more like liquid than I thought. Like, I thought it'd be like an 8-ounce coffee mug. That thing's like 12, I think. It's like a huge coffee mug, and also it's got this nice little sheen on it, and like the Enforcer logo is actually like printed on, and then they put this like enamel coating over it. It's an incredibly good mug. It's a lot better than what I thought it would turn out to be. And so if you're just wanting like a quality mug, I'd actually highly suggest it, because the people over at Teespring do an incredibly good job with the printing and like the actual production of these little products. So I thank you so much for enjoying, getting a mug. Hopefully it arrives very soon and you can see what I'm talking about, because I was highly impressed with mine. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Yeah, and I just want to say real quick before we move on, we've been like staring at that mug ever since we've gotten it in the mail. Like, I think it was like a week ago or something like that. That's just really weird to see like our own logo on a mug. It's just really cool. But, anyways, moving on. Our next one is a $20 donation from Al M, who says, "Thanks, a great job, Enforcer. What could cause exhaustion of the Russian campaign, morale, or logistics? P.S. I'm waiting on my coffee cup. LOL."
Another person to get a coffee mug. That's pretty neat. But to answer your question, I think the the largest hit to morale, to make sure I'm saying that properly, would be the sinking of the Moskva and also the collapse of the northern and eastern fronts. There's really no way you can hide those two massive failures. They're really obvious. Of course, the Russians can phrase the northern and eastern front withdrawals, so we're focusing on blah blah blah. But obviously it was because they lost. They were losing the northern front, everything had fallen apart, and so they had to withdraw because everything was going so terribly. So, also moving on from that, the sinking of the Moskva is probably the largest hit of morale, because that would be like the USS Gerald R. Ford being hit by a missile and sunk at sea. For a U.S. perspective, that would be the pride of America's Navy sinking to the bottom of the sea, and that's really what happened with the Russians, considering that they only have one aircraft carrier, the Kuznetsov, and most of their larger ships. Well, actually, the largest ships they have after the Kuznetsov are the Slava class, so that gives you an idea of how big of a deal that ship was to the Russians. And so I think that's a huge morale loss, and doing things like that will continue to affect Russian morale heavily. Also, successful raids into mainland Russia would also hit morale really bad, but then again, that'll also kind of like make the Russians conduct reprisals in a way, because they'll be trying to mitigate the morale loss and make it look like, look, we got them back, or something like that. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that weighs in a good way. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from I9071, who says, "Do you think Russia will bomb Ukraine like crazy?"
It depends. You see, the thing is that they can't use their air force a lot because most of Ukraine's air defenses are intact. So I don't really know if they'll try and risk it. I don't know if they'll do something like what was that operation called in Vietnam? Operation Rolling Thunder, I believe, where we just sent in B-52s and just started to obliterate Hanoi at one point. I'm not really sure if they would start doing something like that, but who knows, they might. But if the United States and the Western world is able to hurriedly get their air defenses shipped into Ukraine and active, I think that'll help out the Ukrainians a large deal in making sure that that does not become a thing. But I'm not really sure right now. We're just going to have to wait and see what the Russians actually do in the coming days. So I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And we have just a few more super chat questions until we jump over to our live chat questions. So the next one up is a $10 super chat from Simon Gardner. Thank you very much again for your second donation of the night. We appreciate the support. And next up, we have a $5 super chat from BSG Wolf, a longtime channel supporter, who says, "I'm taking care of my neighbor's dog for a bit while she is in the hospital. She is a Corgi Chihuahua mix."
Wow, that sounds bizarre. Let me pull that up. Corgi Chihuahua mix. Oh, that's weird, Matthew. It's like a small corgi. It's like a half Chihuahua, half corgi thing. Like, I expected that a little bit, but that's really weird when you see it. But that's really cool. I hope it gets well, because I really like everything that's a corgi in a way. So I thank you so much for the support, BSG Wolf, and I hope that corgi does get well. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a super chat from Zyper Sniper 1, who puts in a $5 donation and says, "I have been here since day 2 and been here every day. Great work, and Slava Ukraine."
Well, I thank you so much for being a return viewer. I'm glad that you do enjoy the streams enough to watch them over and over. And also, Slava Ukraini. So I thank you very much for the support. It does mean a lot and helps us to run the channel. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another super chat from Not a Teacher, who says, "Don't forget to like and subscribe, y'all."
That's true. Don't forget to like and subscribe because liking helps us reach more people. And I can't say that enough. Unfortunately, while we fight to get the likes we get right now, they are a little low. And so like if everyone could join that Leaf Spring Army initiative and smack that like button right now and get like an extra 1,000 on there, that helps us to reach a lot more people. Because if YouTube doesn't see the video getting a large amount of likes per views, it stops pushing the videos, and so we reach less and less people every day. So if you would like to make sure that we continue to reach more people and more people can hear this level of detail in the news, make sure to like, because that's the biggest amount of help that this channel can get as far as how it reaches new people. So I thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And our next, or actually our last super chat of the night until we move on to our live chat, is from Digital Bladeka, who says, "World Vision is one of the best nonprofits."
I'll make sure to check that. Let me check that out real quick, actually. World Vision, humanitarian aid organization, evangelical Christian humanitarian aid development and advocacy, interdenominational, and also employs staff from non-evangelical Christian denominations. Interesting. I'll have to look into that one. We want to make sure with our charities, because some people will get like, I'm not going to go into that. We'll look into it. I thank you very much for the suggestion. And with that being said, do we have any super chats left?
That's all of them.
All right. And with that being said, let's get on to the questions from the live chat in general.
So our first question from the live chat is from Poisonous Frog, who says, "Enforcer, any idea if Shoigu's apparent fall from favor/poisoning will have much effect on anything?"
I think it will have a large effect on everything going on in this war. The thing is that this guy has been there for 10 years. And so he's been seeing the developments, the changes, he's been overseeing it all, and now he's had a heart attack, and he'll probably never be in the Minister of Defense position again, even if he is able to survive. So they're going to appoint someone new. This guy is going to be inexperienced. He's going to have no clue what's going on at all. While Sergei really had a bad grasp on what's going on here, the new guy is probably going to have an even worse grasp on what's going on, probably going to be much more incompetent, have no experience, and so the war will go even worse, at least is what I'm assuming. So I think that Sergei is going to have a huge impact, and that's why I'm kind of thinking maybe it wasn't the Russians that poisoned him, because that would set the Russians back so far to pretty much execute their own Minister of Defense, just because they pissed him off. That would really put him in a bad position, but I don't know. Putin is so crazy that maybe he did it, but, you know, then again, that's kind of what I'm thinking about the situation right now. And so with that, I hope I answered that question pretty well, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up is a question from Daniel Whittaker, who says, "Enforcer, why would Russia's nuclear arsenal be the one industry they treat different? Even if the intelligence is completely broken and corrupt, why do we think even one bomb would work?"
Could you rephrase that one again real quick? I don't really think I caught it.
So he's saying, why would Russia's nuclear arsenal... So basically he's saying, you know, the Russians are incompetent, so why should we think that any of their nuclear missiles would work if he actually decided to attack somebody?
Well, because we would generally have to assume that they would work. Because if they're launching that, the fact that they're launching one is based off of the assumption that it will work and explode wherever its target is. So if they do launch one, we have to pretty much assume immediately that that nuke will land and explode. And so, you know, we can't really work off the assumption of the off chance that it may be a dud nuke. So, you know, it's kind of like the basis of, you know, it's kind of hard. I'll try and make it an analogy. I'm not really explaining this too well, but if someone aimed a gun at you and they pulled the trigger, you would have to assume that they're trying to kill you. Whether the bullet misfires or not is really out of the question. You're just looking at the fact that they're aiming a gun at someone and they're pulling the trigger, and that means that they're trying to kill them. So whether the bullet misfires or not is really out of the question. The fact of the matter is that they're still trying to kill them, and so the other person, well, you know, a third person maybe who's trying to save the person who's about to get shot, might want to actually just pull out a gun real quick and shoot that other person before we can figure out if that bullet will misfire or not, or something like that, if you see what I'm saying. So I hope that analogy kind of explains why we care. I hope it was a pretty good one. I'm not really sure if it was, but with that, we're going to move on to our last question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person who got the last question?
So the last one of the night goes to J79, who says, Enforcer, recent video shows Ukraine army has taken possession of TOS-1 and hyperbaric missiles. Should they be used versus Russia, or is the threat to civilians too high?
The threat, well, really, I wouldn't use them against the Russians, because first off, then the Russians would say, oh, look at them, they're committing war crimes, we need to get in there really big. So they may not want to do that because they're dealing with hypocrites. On top of that, they can't use that in the southern front because if they were to use it, then they would be pretty much genociding their own civilians in a way with the thermobaric weapons. So, unfortunately, I think that capture is really just capturing it for the fact of it. I think it'll just probably wind up in a military museum somewhere on display. It's kind of like a war trophy to the public. But I don't really think there's a way for them to effectively use the TOS right now, because that would either incur them looking like war criminals and the Russians would try and paint them as the villains, or they would use it in the southeastern front and end up probably killing their own civilians in the process. So, unfortunately, I don't think that is a usable vehicle that they've captured. I think they'll just have to keep that as kind of like a relic and a museum piece in the future. So with that, I hope I've answered that question very well, and we've reached the end of tonight's stream. If you're a new viewer, I hope you did enjoy the video, if you've made it all the way through the question segment as well, and I hope you got something interesting out of it. So I thank y'all all so much for watching. We do, of course, stream every night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be on here tomorrow and Sunday, and we actually do take off Mondays, so we will not be streaming Monday. We'll probably actually be filming that day as well, so that'll actually be pretty good because that'll give us a lot of time to do whatever we need filming, and we won't have to hurry back home and start like getting ready for the stream. So I thank y'all all so much for watching, and I'll see y'all all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you once again, and I hope y'all all have a great night. Take care.